only do a project that your projections give you some margin for error, because you're going to have some error. Something's going to go wrong.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. Hello and welcome to episode 79. I'm going to begin today's episode with a little story. And it's a story about a 4-unit that I purchased back in 2009 on the west side of Grand Rapids. The recession was just beginning. The west side of Grand Rapids was really kind of a C neighborhood. You had a lot of lower to middle income residents, a lot of Section 8 residents, but it was still a good place to own rental property. And we did pretty well. My partner and I did pretty well with this 4-unit. But right next door to it was this dilapidated 2-unit that had been vacant for a long time. The windows were boarded up. The windows that weren't boarded up, I could see animals going in and out. And obviously, there were a lot of properties like that at the time, and this one was no different. But it didn't really seem to have any effect on our 4-unit, so we just happily kept renting out our 4-unit until last year, when my property manager, Marty Green from Green Property Management, gave me a call, and he said, Brian, what's going on with that 2-unit? Because we're trying to get new residents into one of your units, and that property is really kind of dragging down our prospects. I mean, people see that next door, and they think it's going to attract a lot of kind of negative elements to the neighborhood. Why don't you see what's happening with that property and see if you can buy it? And I said, well, Marty, what would I do with it if I bought it? I mean, it looks like it's a teardown. And Marty said, well, that's probably what you should do, is buy it and tear it down so it doesn't detract from the value of your 4-unit. I said, okay, Marty. And I went online and I did some research and figured out who owned the property. And I saw that it had just been purchased a month earlier by a guy named Mike VanderWoude. And I said, well, who is this Mike VanderWoude guy and what's he going to do with it? So I did a little research on him and found out that he is a broker for 616 Places, which is a respected company, developer and provider of residential living here in Grand Rapids. And I thought, well, let me give him a call and see what his plans are. So I called Mike VanderWoude up and I said, Mike, I own the 4-unit right next door to your 2-unit. What are your intentions? And Mike said, well, I just bought it. I'm going to rehab it, and I'm going to rent it out at market rate and try to get $1,200 a floor. And I said, well, that's great, Mike. That's great. Let me know how it goes. Because inside I'm thinking, well, good luck with that, because this property looks like a teardown to me. And I said, well, Mike, when you do it and you get it rented out, let me know, and we'll do a podcast together and talk about how you did it. So here in the studio with me today is no one other than Mike VanderWoude, broker with 616 Places, here to tell us how it went with his 2-unit rehab of this dilapidated property that I would have just torn down. So Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This will be fun. Yeah, it was not really a surprise, but I got your call that day, and I don't know if you remember, we had met a few years earlier at a 6-unit listing that I'd had. So I could tell you were a serious guy, and I recognized your name, and I saved you in my phone. So here's this name popping up that I know as a multifamily owner around town, and obviously you're very involved in this RPOA thing. And so we took the call and we chatted, and that's accurate. I had just closed. A few things that had changed for me, so it took me a couple months to get going on construction, but how I got there in the first place, I'm an everyday broker. I do residential properties. I do a fair amount of investment properties, particularly relative to other, residential realtors. I do a little bit of commercial work. So I hold the dual membership in the various associations. But a client had brought me this property. I think I can say the client. The client was the Fulton Group. And I had done some other work for them. And they own a number of properties, but they also have a little bit of a backlog of future projects. And they're out there doing some projects even today to get more of their inventory online.
This is one they had been sitting on for
They'd been sitting on it, I believe it was 4 years. One of their owners came to me. They're also friends, but one of their owners came to me and said, hey, there was a different property on Lexington. He said, I've owned it for 2 years and I've never set foot in it. I got too much. Let's sell that. So we sold that one. We listed it and sold it. And some new investor came into the market, bought that. And that one's right by that new Meyer project. So we think that guy's going to do very well.
So they picked a good location on the northwest side there.
Yep. And that was just a 3-bedroom single family. Then the same guys brought me this other one and said, hey, this one's a little worse. This one doesn't have walls. It's just a boarded up shell. And I said, I'm not afraid to list that. It was right around this time last year. And I was coming into a new source of cash, and I thought, nuts. I'm always helping other people do these things. I'm getting a little older. I'm turning 40. I've got kids and a retirement account and all that. I need some diversity in my life. So I decided to say to them, hey, give me a week or two. Let me figure out if I can pull this off myself.
Now, up to this point, had you ever purchased investment property for yourself?
I had owned a rental that my wife and I had moved out of, and that was a pretty good experience. It was a higher end property that we rented for a lot of money, but it also cost us a fair amount of money. So it wasn't a real big cash flower, and it became a success in the end when 3 years after moving out of it, we could sell it at a nice little profit. But that one was really about hanging on to it until the market came back around. It was really a kind of a luxury condo. But I hadn't had just straight up rentals, you could say. But I had helped possibly dozens of other people own them. So it just seemed like the time,
Seemed like the right fit.
Yeah. Some of these things in our careers just happen at a time and a place that it just makes sense for them to happen.
Now, was it the opportunity, or was there something about this property that you liked?
I am bullish on that area. My office had been at Strait and Fulton for 4 years, and oddly enough, during that time, I wasn't doing much in the neighborhood, but I had 2 specific clients that really owned a ton of that part of town, mostly single family and 2 to 4 unit properties. So I had been more active there, and I think immediately prior I had done an off-market transaction, putting one of those clients into yet another 2-unit on Watson, which was next door to one that I had sold to another guy a couple of years earlier. And so I had seen some of these properties and how they were improved and the kind of rents they could get, even compared to, say, some of the more dilapidated ones next door. And that was really interesting. There's not, in my opinion, not really another market in Grand Rapids quite like that northwest and immediate southwest sides. If you look at Easttown, for instance, I think everything falls within a more similar range and varies only depending on, the current condition of a property. And I haven't seen a lot of property in, say, Easttown where people have gone really high end, but that's happening over there on the southwest side. Let's give GVSU some credit for that.
We're talking west side of Grand Rapids. This location is within walking distance to Grand Valley State University.
Yep.
Also downtown Grand Rapids. So it's kind of it's always been the neighborhood that was sort of cast aside for a long time.
Sure.
But now, because so many students are looking for more affordable neighborhoods to live in, this has really come into its own, the west side of Grand Rapids.
It's said that GVSU is now harder to get into than Michigan State, and I think it's kind of underrated. What I've seen just being an agent in Grand Rapids these last really 5 years as a day-to-day agent, I've seen a ton of new agents come out of the population of Grand Valley graduates that came from the east side of the state, came to school at Grand Valley, liked it here, graduated, and stayed. And just being a 40-year-old guy from Grand Rapids, when it was my generation's turn at that stage in life, there wasn't so much of that. So we're drawing people from other parts of the state to go to school and then to stay.
Yeah. And the survival of any downtown or large community is its ability to keep the millennials, to make them want to stay and not move off to Chicago or New York or Atlanta or some other big city.
And that's what my generation did.
Yeah, mine too.
They'd graduate, from Western or whatever. Nowadays it's Grand Valley, and head to Chicago or some other major city. We're keeping this particular generation here, and they're smart and they're employed, and they have a certain standard of living that they want to maintain, and perhaps this niche solves that.
So let's talk about the niche that you bought in. So you liked the location, but you had to look at this property and say, "Wow, this is a big undertaking." You
sure
basically have a shell. That is really, needs some work as well. Let's talk about just before you bought it. What was your thought process? How did you tell your wife about this?
Yeah. Great question. She knew our finances, so she knew I had something to work with, but also wasn't going to be wild about the risk factor. So I had to have some element of, maybe not a sure thing, but that I could make something good out of this. So I talked to a lot of people. My friends at the Fulton Group were giving me advice. Steve Woodbury probably listens to this podcast. He was giving me a lot of advice.
Steve's been a guest on the show.
He's been in that building a bunch of times. So I was getting advice from those two. There's another broker that completely redid a building across the street. And I called him and said, "Hey, I saw you own this. What'd you do?" He told me how much he had into it. He told me how much he could rent it for. And the formula sounded like what I was putting together. So I thought, this guy did it. These other two guys are telling me that it's possible. I said, I'm gathering enough information here to feel comfortable about this. So I had a means by which at the time I could finance it all cash. Something happened to that, but I had enough cash to at least take down the sale. And then I had to sit on it for 3 months while I was getting a construction loan.
So let's talk about, can we talk numbers here?
Sure.
So what did it cost then to take it down? So this is a 2-unit, vacant. It's going to need a lot of work, but yet in an up-and-coming area. What did you end up paying for it?
My client wanted me to list it for about $50,000. And that was a little bit of swag in there, thinking, somebody will make us an offer. I said, give me a week. Let me play with some numbers. I'm relatively comfortable with spreadsheets. And I said, guys, obviously you don't have to pay me a commission on this if I'm the buyer, but I'm coming in a little lower. I said, hey, how about 35 cash, close in a couple weeks. And we settled around there. I may have started lower, and I probably paid a few of their closing costs in terms of, I think, some transfer taxes or something like that. So I think I settled on the purchase at a little bit above $36,000 cash.
Okay.
Then I went out and got my vacant property insurance, which is a kick in the teeth if you've never had it. And
that's what, like double, triple what normal insurance costs?
It's awful. So I got that, and then had to pay the city a little bit to, their little penalty for properties that are boarded up. They charge you for that. So that's a few $100s a month, and I didn't want to carry that.
So I had
for
the
very
Fulton
long.
Group been paying that?
I would assume.
Wow.
Yeah. They must have been. So had to get construction loan together, went through Jeff Timmer at LMCU. He did a good job, got a good rate, but didn't really have access to it almost until Thanksgiving on a purchase that was really 3 months earlier. And so I had a little cash around, had to find a new contractor. The main guy I had lined up decided he was just going to retire. So he said he was lined up to do it, and he said, you know what, I'm going to pass. Asked around. Woodbury, in fact, helped me find a guy he had worked with. And so I was able to take some cash and sort of do some prep work. For instance, near the back of the lower level, for some reason, the floor joist turned 90 degrees, about the back 2/3 or back 1/3 of the building. We couldn't figure this out. We thought it would be problematic. So we just straightened them out. And I was able to pay him cash for stuff like that. There was this awful old fire escape off the back of the building that we tore off because we determined that the current code, the size of the building, we didn't need an additional fire escape. Fortunately, we were right, so we tore that off. So I started prepping it and really didn't get into kind of the heavy lifting, such as like the roof. Roof went first, of course, until we had the construction loan late November.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. How do you get a construction loan on a property that is really, in this kind of shape?
Yeah. I was pretty impressed that the product was available. I had to really lay out a lot of information about what it was and what it wasn't and what I was going to do. But in planning to do this for the first time, I had to do that anyway. So I wasn't repeating a lot of prep or tasks.
Was it a package you had to put together for the lender?
More or less.
That kind of told the story of this is what it is, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this with it to
exactly right.
Bring it back to life.
Yep. So I had verified prior to closing even that it was still considered a 2-unit, even though nobody had lived in it in maybe 10 years.
So how did you verify that? Do you go to the city?
I got online, and there's pretty much a list that you can download and look at. But then I contacted the development office and said, hey, I need some assurances here that I start rebuilding this, that I got 2 units. And for about $200, I paid for a sort of a certification that they couldn't come back and say, oh, well, density, we want it to be a single unit. So and the way it was laid out, it had separate entrances and all that. So I was able to pay for that to assure myself, and then just to have some sort of documentation that it couldn't be turned back into a 1 midway through the project.
It's good that you verify that, because that happens all the time. People buy a property thinking it is a 2-unit, and then they find out, no, it's not. It's actually a single family.
And you even see properties listed on the MLS as 2 units that say, hey, well, it's really been run as a single unit, but there's a separate entrance, implying that you could get a second unit out of it, and there's no certainty to that.
Right.
So
and in some community, I used to live in Los Angeles, and people there, they do that all the time. It's not it's not registered with the city. It's not done properly.
Right.
But as long as they get away with it, they can do whatever they want. But here in Grand Rapids, it's a little tighter. You can't.
They keep up with it pretty well.
With it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you verified it was a 2-unit.
Yep.
What were some of the other steps you took to make sure that this was going to be a good purchase for you?
Well, we did, we prepped all the construction sworn statements, and I got a good contractor, Randy Richardson of Maple Valley. And he was great with me as far as knowing and understanding I hadn't really done this. So he walked me through every step. He got all the bids. We shopped a few things around a little bit, and a lot of this is in advance of the construction loan even funding. So we had some certainty that I would be able to get the construction loan, but we had to do all this without actually having it yet. And there was real time put into that. So he was great as far as, walking me along and making sure I don't miss certain key things. And so that really went on. That took a couple months, and LMCU was doing their underwriting in the background.
Lake Michigan Credit Union.
Yep, Lake Michigan Credit Union.
So they're underwriting it, and what are they looking at when they underwrite a property like this?
They were looking at everything from my rent projections, which I was really just getting from Fulton Group and the Whittaberries, and the fact that my utilities were going to be split, so that as the landlord or the person paying them back one day, that I wasn't going to have all kinds of expenses that were unforeseen, that there was a plan for all those. So I have tenant paid utilities and all that. And just, making sure that in a complete rehab of a building that it's going to be complete, that there were no corners to cut on this thing, and they wanted to know that as well. I mean, it needed everything.
Yeah. I mean, there was nothing salvageable in that property other than maybe the floorboards and the walls.
That was about it. Yep, there was very little demo to do, which was nice. So
was it already an empty shell?
Yep.
Were the walls and everything gone?
Yep. You could see where you could see how the old units were laid out, and it also needed to be done differently.
Do you know the story of this property? What had happened?
Not really.
Did someone start it and just never finished? Or
I would think that whoever owned it prior to the Fulton Group got started, stopped for whatever reason, and then maybe it was as simple. I haven't determined whether it was a tax foreclosure or whatever, but I would think that somebody really just said, "Screw it, this is too much work." Moving on.
So other people had given up before you got in there.
I think so. Yeah. And, in their favor, or to their credit, the market at the time probably wasn't what it was by 2016.
Yeah, they certainly would not have been getting $1,200 a door.
Right.
So you did your due diligence.
Sure.
You spent about 3 months really working out your numbers.
Yep.
What kind of budget did you have then to do the rehab that you needed to do?
Yeah. Well, I knew I had right in the range of $116,000 to work with on construction loan. So I sat down with my contractor and knew I wanted to do a really nice project, which is going to take some spending that might even look indulgent, and had to remind myself, okay, this is still a rental. So we had to sort of tap things up and down in certain areas of the budget. I knew that as things got down toward the end, I might have to put this or that on a credit card or a line of credit that I have in my own house. And a few of those things happened. But Randy was also great about finding room, in the budget on the sworn statements. Like, for instance, with our cabinetry, relatively small kitchens, I ended up saving like $2,500 against our original projection. So certain things kind of moved up and down on the spreadsheet. The thing that stands out at the end is I put all new stainless steel appliances in there, and every inch of that went on a credit card. But it was the last thing I needed to do, and so we were over budget there, but picked up money here or there along the way.
The bank gave you a loan for $116,000.
Right.
A construction loan.
Construction loan.
How did they come up with that number?
Yeah, that was LTV driven, and we got an appraisal as complete for about $166,000. And I believe it was like a 70% LTV.
So they took the after repair value.
Correct.
And gave you 75% of that.
Yeah, I think it was 70, but
or 70%.
Right in there. Yep.
Okay.
So that's how I knew what I had to work with. I thought it would be a little bit higher, but with some of these things, you get to the 11th hour and an underwriter, tweaks this or that, and then you got left to work with what you got. Yeah. So.
And then you had to put probably an additional $10,000 to $20,000 in yourself. Huh?
That's fair. Yep. Yeah. Right around that.
Okay, so that's the kind of leading up to the construction phase.
Yeah.
And then Randy, he got in there and started
Yep.
doing his thing once the money was available.
Yep.
Talk about that. What was the construction phase like, and how long did that last?
Yeah, it ended up lasting nearly 6 months. Like probably any other project of its kind, there were a few unforeseen things, such as the water service, to the street. I think you and I went through
Well,
that.
yeah. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So at one point
Yep.
during the construction phase, you called me
Right.
with a problem.
Yep.
Tell us what that problem was.
The water meter for my building was in your basement next door, which was really odd.
Uh-huh.
Even the people from the city were saying they hadn't seen that before. But my building hadn't been occupied in 10 years, at least. Could be longer. And so there was no reason for anybody to even be looking at that issue. So I think we briefly thought, well, could we save a little money here and just have our water meter in the neighbor's basement? And as long as you and I get along, we can get in. Who knows what would happen if you sold or if I sold, and so it was investigated and thought, for about $1,500, I can tie in to the sewer right out front, have my own meters. It also looked like if I had 2 new sets of baths and kitchens that the pipes underneath your building weren't going to give us quite the pressure we wanted for everybody.
Yeah, you didn't have the width of pipe coming in
Correct.
to accommodate both properties.
Correct. So I didn't want to go asking $1,200 for a unit that barely trickles at the shower, and I was going to put washer dryer in, dishwashers. So I knew I was going to have some demand. Not every apartment has a dishwasher or washer dryer. So it just made sense to put that in.
So at the end of the day, you decided to run the water from
Yep.
the street
Yep.
into your basement and
Yep.
meter it there.
Yep. Single meter, very hard to split water in Grand Rapids. Really the only way that I've seen to do it is put something in the lease that divides the water bill by 2, but I didn't bother doing that.
Yeah. And we had talked about, I remember saying, well, you should see if you could get 2 water meters and
Right.
split it. But then after I said that, someone else said, well, you always want to pay the water yourself as a
Sure.
landlord, because the city or whoever's providing the water can put a lien on your property
Right.
if it's not paid.
Right.
So I guess at the end of the day, it's probably best if you do pay
Yep.
the water bill.
And for the kind of rent I'm going to be able to get, a water bill will keep me honest at least, with no other utilities to pay.
Yeah, and really you're looking at what, $600 to $800 a year
I think that's
for water.
Reasonable for relatively small units that are
Yeah.
750 square feet or so.
Yeah, so that was one issue you ran. You
Yep.
must have run into some other issues during construction with a
Yeah,
property like this.
there were oddball things like that fire escape, or like those stairs that went from the side of the property into the basement, which was primarily serving as raccoon access for the last 10 years.
So you saw a lot of evidence of animal activity.
Oh yeah, yeah. At one point, the contractor found a raccoon just hanging out. There was a carcass or 2 of other kinds of animals in the basement. All kinds of things. So animals and humans had been able to get into that basement deal, and so we bricked that up, and that also kept water from pouring into the basement. So. Things like that.
You had an open hole in the back, didn't you? That was just allowing water to pour right
Yep.
in.
Right down the stairs, right into the basement. So
Did that create any foundation issues?
doesn't appear to be. It's not the driest basement I've ever seen, but it's also not so bad, especially now. And we put in glass block with a vent opening in it, so you can kind of, during these nicer parts of the year, take kind of the damp out just by venting. So, the very edges of it seem damp at worst, but I've seen no standing water of any kind down there. And, we did smart things like lift the furnace and the water heaters up off the floor. Mm-hmm. Just, if we got an inch, nothing's going to be harmed.
Yeah, I mean, you see that in these Michigan Michigan basement, right? So
pretty much.
Yeah,
It's got some poured, foundation wall, and then sitting on top of that was essentially cinder blocks for a few feet.
Okay.
And you could see daylight through those. So those are now covered in a foam sealant of some type, kind of an insulation. Okay. So that was an obvious thing to do. Mm-hmm. So, and one of the fun things about the project, which wasn't really unexpected, but when you have 0 furnaces, it's much easier to make the decision of, well, let's put in 2 instead of, boy, do I pay the money to have split utilities that, and save by only putting in 1 furnace. It made all the sense in the world just to split everything I could.
So you're designing from scratch then.
Yep.
So you're able to split the electric, split the gas.
Yep.
And let the residents pay those expenses themselves.
Exactly right. And even from a design standpoint, we could move where the bedrooms were located. So we took them all. It appeared that at one point they all ran along the north side of the property and probably had this like long, weird kitchen. We think the bathrooms were at the rear just because the old plumbing stack was there. So it made sense to me, and I got a little help from the Fulton group on this, push the bedrooms to the back, get them away from the street. The noisiest thing around is going to be the street. They look over a little lawn back there, made them all the same size. I've heard that from a ton of different tenants is that they go see a prospective apartment and it'll have 1 big room and 1 small room, and they don't know how to settle that. Mm-hmm. So we were able to design it so that there's only 4 bedrooms in the building now, but they're identical.
Well, that's smart. That really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And you got that advice from the Fulton group? Or?
Fulton group helped with that. We put nice closets and organizers and even lights in the closets, ceiling fans. So the bedrooms are real nice in this building. They're, like I said, they're at the back of the property, and then open is kind of the design that people are looking for in housing, whether they own it or rent it. So pretty much the front of each unit is largely open, kitchen and living room, and then along the south end we had to squeeze the bathrooms in.
Yeah, so and I've been in them, and they are really nice. And that your kitchens,
thank you,
open up to the living room, and in the upstairs unit, there's an outdoor deck.
Yep.
That they can go on, and downstairs there's a nice porch that the residents can go on, and you just kind of see that from the kitchen, and it really gives it a nice open flow to it. So I think that's really smart and strategic when you're designing from scratch to really think about, well, what are the residents going to be looking for? Yeah. And just the fact that you thought, well, the both bedrooms need to be the same size. Yeah. That's a huge thing, because if you have 2 roommates, they don't want to fight over which bedroom to have. Now it's a pretty easy decision. They just either one is going to be fine. Yeah, just pick one. Yep. Were there other examples of things that potential residents are looking for that you built into this? Yeah.
Washer dryer was a big one. I went stackable in that, that I think they're all HE now, but those are electric, not gas. But that's a viable product now. In one case, in the lower unit, just the way the units lay out, I was able to have a huge bathroom. And so in that case, that washer dryer's in the bathroom, and we just did like a shower surround instead of a tub. Well, you get upstairs and things lay out a little differently. So there was this unusual coat closet up near that front balcony entrance or porch entrance, and that became the laundry room. So had to make little decisions, but still able to put the same amenities, I guess, into each unit.
So your laundry hardwood floors?
It's like a luxury vinyl plank product.
Okay, so it's got a nice
same thing that
look.
616 uses in their
which is really nice.
Yep.
And durable too.
Yep.
Same size bathrooms, same size bedrooms. Yep. Open flow from the kitchen to the living room, outdoor space with the balcony and the porch. What else do residents typically look for?
Well, I had heard that off-street parking was a big thing, and I knew I didn't have that. And so that was what I I perceived that to be a risk I was taking, that maybe people wouldn't be attracted to the unit because they had no place to park their car, quote unquote. But when you look around, nearly every other property surrounding me had off-street parking. So nobody was ever parked in the street. So once I ended up listing it on hot pads and showing it probably dozen to 20 times. And it's one of the first things they would ask about. And usually I met somebody on that front porch and they had just gotten out of their car. And it was all different times of day, sometimes including, the evenings when you would think people are coming home. And they'd say, do you have any parking? I said, oh, it's all street parking. And they would ask, if that's a problem. And in many cases I said, well, turn around and look where you just parked. And they would say, oh, okay, gotcha. And when I go there, when I've gone there periodically or through construction, I always parked right out front. So that hasn't ended up being a minus, and I can't see how it could become one in the future because, for instance, your building has some parking. All the other buildings around me have some parking. These buildings aren't likely to get more dense. They're not going to all of a sudden have twice as many people living in them. So what I considered one of the minuses of this property hasn't really been a problem yet.
Yeah, and one of the plus things of the west side is that there's plenty of street parking.
Right.
You don't run into
It's everywhere.
There's parking is very, very tight throughout the rest of the city.
Yep.
And in a lot of the other areas, Heritage Hill, downtown Grand Rapids, but on the west side there's plenty of street parking.
Yeah.
So that turned out to be okay.
Yeah.
So you got through the construction phase. I mean, anything else of note that happened during that period?
No, just running into these little unforeseen things to handle, such as that water service thing. Got a lot of people sort of knocking on the door, offering me other properties, which was interesting.
Offering you other properties?
Somebody came out of the woodwork telling me to buy the one across the street.
Another vacant property?
It wasn't vacant, but it needed kind of a new life. And if they could have held on a little longer, I'd be buying it right now. But they ended up selling it in the meantime. I wasn't quite ready. Another guy from down the street identified himself as he was older, and he said, hey, I'm kind of tired of taking care of this 2-unit I have. I live in it. Make me an offer. And I'm getting back in touch with that guy. So that was kind of a surprise, just seeing people come out of nowhere. Really just that.
Interesting. So some new opportunities came from people just seeing you working there and coming up to you and saying, hey, here's an opportunity that you might be interested in.
And it's helped me in my regular business. I do the work for a couple of flippers, and I have a better understanding of their timelines and of what certain things cost, and that's been interesting to learn. So, even though mine's not a flip, it's a full rehab.
So you got through the construction phase.
Yep.
And I remember you telling me that you were going to try to get $1,200 a door.
Yep.
That's what you were thinking.
Yep.
And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, next door at my 4-unit, I've got 1 bedrooms and I've got 2 bedrooms.
Yep.
And I think I'm probably getting between $650 to $800 a door.
Yep.
So $1,200 to me. Now, obviously, these are not newer. I haven't done any real rehab on these units. They don't have the granite countertops or the nice, washer or dryer.
Right. A
lot of the things that you were able to put in. But $1,200 seemed really high for the neighborhood.
Even to me.
I mean, on the west side, it's a number that I didn't think we'd see for another 10 years.
Yep.
So you get it to the place where you can start showing.
Yep.
Talk about that. Talk about the trying to find residents and showing what kind of feedback you were getting.
Yeah. So I asked around to various other owners and said, what do you guys do? And obviously I'm a real estate broker, so I know how to market a property, but I didn't think that putting it on my own MLS was the way to go. So I think it was the Fulton Group guys that told me about hotpads.com. And so I went there and looked plausible. And so I hired the same photographer that I use for my residential sale photo shoots. And I said, hey, I'm going to own this property for a long time. I may have to advertise it in the future. I said, can you get over there, get me some nice high-end shots, and do the floor plans as well? So I ended up paying him a couple $100, which I think most people probably don't want to do on their rental properties.
So marketing cost, it paid great photos.
Yeah, I'll be able to use them for 10 years.
Dividends, yeah.
Yep. So did that, put it online, and immediately started getting contacts from people.
And you put it on, so are you saying you put it on HotPads?
Hotpads.com.
Hotpads.com.
Yep.
And you listed at $1,200 a door? So people were calling you. The price obviously wasn't scaring people off.
And I had even, in my projections, I had even come in a little lower. But other people in my life that I trust, some of these other names I've mentioned, were saying, hey, shoot for $1,200, shoot for $1,200. When I did a spreadsheet, I might have worked with $1,100, or at one point I think I had it as low as $1,100 for the upper and $1,000 for the lower, just because I think the upper turned out a little cooler. But I'm also a real estate broker that lists properties sometimes at the very upper end of what I think they might go for. So why not do the same with my own? So it was amazing that nobody balked at the price. We had one set of prospects that were like, yeah, we really like it. Would you consider $1,100? And just based on the demand or the number of people that came to see it, those were nice prospective tenants, but I had no reason to say, sure, I'll take $1,100.
What was the makeup of the prospective residents? Were they students,
No.
young professionals? What kind of
Almost
people were
entirely college grad young professionals.
Really?
I'm not sure we're supposed to talk about ages or whatever, but I bet the oldest person that looked at it was about 35. And I'm guessing the vast majority of, let's say, 20, 25 people looked, mostly in their 20s. I didn't see everybody's application, but I would bet that nearly all of them had a college degree, a lot of those from Grand Valley, but not even entirely. There were other people coming to town for various jobs.
Married couples, roommates, families?
Mostly roommates, dating couples that had previously lived together. I think what we got in there now is just a couple of buddies that had moved out of a larger rental on Heritage Hill where they were tired of living with 5 guys. And they both had solid jobs. And, I did their little background check through RPOA, and those looked good. And then the lower unit ended up being a pair of sisters who are both nurses at Helen DeVos. So, real educated, seemed like people that I could trust to take care of a property that I just invested what to me is a small fortune in. These units are nicer than my house. And I'm about to hand them off to these, they're all millennials for sure, but I got to know these people a little bit, and I'm really comfortable that they'll take care of it.
That's great.
I even made up a little addendum about the care of granite countertops, and it said, it's a porous substance, so don't leave like soap out on it, for instance, and don't use a cutting board. Don't cut the limes for your Coronas right on the surface, please. And so I made up this sort of 10-point understanding of how to care for and not care for granite, and I said, put a line on the bottom, said, I've read this and I understand it. And they seem comfortable with these kinds of things, and I know that from talking to these people that these units were nicer than what they were looking at, even at comparable prices. So they were, I think, in a way, glad to be the first ones to move in, and I'm reasonably comfortable, along with a security deposit, that they'll take care of them.
Yeah.
So
on the show, I've had other investors who use the 1% rule,
Sure.
which is you want whatever you buy the property for or have into it, you want it to be, you want your income to be more than 1%.
Sure.
Your monthly income to be more than 1% of your all in. So you have like 36 plus the loan of 116, plus whatever,
I got about the appraisal value into it.
So you're about 170.
Yeah.
Right
I think
around
right in the 160s. Yep.
And you're getting, $2,400 a month.
Yeah.
So you're probably like 1.6% of.
Sounds about right.
So that's pretty good. That's a great first shot at.
And I've heard other investors talk about their financial model, and I actually recommend that investors kind of make up their own. But there's another guy that told me about the formula about the number of months, and he would say that anything under like 120 months was acceptable, and this one's at about 60.
A payback under 100?
More or less, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. And so now when I look at 2-unit properties, I have a little spreadsheet that tracks the number of months. And going and looking at properties on the market, I can't get anything that gives me the same equivalent number of months as what I just put together, but it also took me 6 months to redevelop this and get it rented. So if you can step into something else at a higher number of months, maybe it works as long as you have some kind of formula.
Yeah.
And for these small buildings, I'm not sure that cap rate is it. Cap rate is just one measure.
Yeah, cap rate is just one measure when you're dealing with a smaller residential, because your value ultimately is still tied to the comps in the neighborhood.
Right.
I mean, obviously, the fact that yours is a much nicer property will be taken into account, but you're still tied to the comps.
Yeah.
So cap rate, is helpful, but not really in this kind of situation.
Right.
The loan that you had a construction loan. Did you now convert that to a permanent 30-year fixed, or what did you do there?
Not exactly. As of about a year after opening it up, it converts to a 7-year ARM. And, I'm sure there's people listening that think, oh, an ARM, didn't we do this before in around 2005? And didn't that cause a lot of trouble? But there was enough margin in this one that, one, if I had to, I can just pay it off during the 7 years. There's enough cash flow. Or I could refi out of it later. Mm-hmm. So, but there's enough of a spread there that being in an ARM doesn't.
Yeah, so you have the ability to refi.
Yeah.
But for now, I'm sure with the ARM, it's probably a pretty decent interest rate.
Yeah, at 4%, I'm going to ride this out as long as I can.
Great.
And if I need to hammer down on it with the excess cash flow, so be it. But it's going to bring in a lot more than it's costing me. So.
And now that you've kind of been through the experience, you have residents who have moved in already, or about
in the next week. Yep.
Okay, so by the time people hear this, you'll have residents living in your property.
Sure.
Looking back, what would you have done differently?
I may have simplified certain things like bathroom cabinetry. It's almost too nice. I have a tub in one of the units that nobody seems to care about having a tub, so I probably would have just done another stand-up shower. Aside from that, not too much. I would have gone faster and gotten but I'm not sure I could control that.
But now that you have a team in place, you will go faster next time. It took you a little while. I mean, obviously you had to take this down quickly.
Right.
With cash.
Yep.
Leading to a 3-month sort of lag time figuring out who your team was going to be.
Yeah.
But now you've got that in place. The next one will probably be twice as fast.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I look around at what's out there, I'm motivated to do it again immediately. But, it just turns out that these boarded up buildings fortunately aren't as common as you think. So the next one is to do one exactly like this one, I think is going to be challenging to find. Yeah. So it's more likely to be just a existing 2-unit that maybe needs a little improvement, or something that's stable. And if I want to go sort of the high end route again, I would have to do it at the turn of a lease, lose a month, send in a contractor, redo a lot of things, and then bump the rents. But doing the exact project again doesn't appear to be very repeatable, and it just kind of fell in my lap.
Yeah, every property and opportunity is different,
right?
But at least you have a good, having done it the first time.
Sure,
the next time will go that much quicker and that much easier.
Yeah. I mean, experience is priceless. So, what I really got out of it was I have some ability to make decisions in these circumstances. I didn't agonize over every, paint color or every surface. I just looked at something, said, is it nice? Yes. Is it still a rental? Yes. Go with it. Now the appliances don't all match their brand and stuff like that. But they're nice, stainless, all new. So I wouldn't do that any different. And, it's probably nicer than any of these tenants had in their last apartment.
Sure.
So
it's all brand new.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any advice for the people listening to this who are thinking of doing something very similar?
Stay nimble in your decision making. There's very few aspects of this that will make or break your entire project. Keep it moving forward. Things like that water service decision. Make the decision and be ready to live with it. And just only do a project that your projections give you some margin for error, because you're going to have some error. Something's going to go wrong. So be ready for that.
How much padding did you put in your budget, and did you use that up?
I used it up, but knowing that we were going to pick up, 1,000 here, 1,000 there, the 2,500 on cabinets. We did similarly well on flooring simply by going to Menards. So I pretty much used it up, but I had a little extra that my contractor didn't quite know how much I had to work with. Mm-hmm. So, and like I said, the appliances went on a credit card. So It's not my favorite part of it, but I can pay those off.
Yeah.
So, and Nuara Brothers, if I can plug them a little bit, they did terrific. It's right around the corner. Went over there, told them what I had, told them they were welcome to go take a look. Met a young employee there. I think his name was Justin, and he nailed it. It was well priced, installed, delivered and installed. Contractor didn't want to install them. He wanted the supplier to install them. So they did great as well, and they're right in the neighborhood.
Well, Mike, congratulations
on
your success with this property. I'm thrilled to see that this 2-unit next door to my 4-unit has come back to life, and you're doing so well with it. It's kind of inspired me to kick everyone out of my 4-unit.
There you go. Let's see it happen.
and make it nicer, but I won't do that. If you're listening and you live there, I won't be kicking you out. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And good luck on finding the next one.
Thanks for having me.
This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.